as far as I know, he tried his level best to make sure that there wouldn't be one. But the fact is that
he signed the protocol. He created it.
He had his back to the wall. We had to get that agreement through. We had to get Brexit done. Now, I absolutely despair of the border down the Irish Sea because I think it imperils the Union. And I would never support anything which imperils the Union. My view throughout, and I said it throughout, was that we should have had an extremely soft border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, which did not hark back to the days of the Troubles, and which made huge use of technology to track what was going on, rather than people parading up and down.
Dominic Cummings.
Yes.
And the offer from Mr. Cummings that people can look through all of his emails. I wonder how many of Boris's skeletons are in those emails. Well, do you think Boris Johnson's now in a precarious situation, and as any leader might be if their right-hand person turns on them?
Well, Dominic Cummings will make a very, very bad enemy. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all, and I would be a fool to say otherwise. He would be an extremely bad enemy to have. And it's perfectly true that when you're somebody like Boris, you speak as you feel at the moment. You don't necessarily act in a circumspect fashion the whole time with people with whom you're relaxed and whom you trust. So there may well be what could be perceived as skeletons, which may be nothing of the sort. But again, I say to you, there are more important things to worry about.
Well, it depends what those skeletons are.
Wait, but you don't know, you're speculating again.
Well, I'm not speculating because I'm saying it depends what they are. Obviously it does. What we do know is that the BBC, ITV, respected reporters with decades of experience in some of our newspapers, so multiple sources are saying that Boris Johnson did speak of letting bodies pile high rather than closing down the economy. How damaging is that, if that is proven to be true?
I don't think it is particularly damaging. I think that if he said that, then he said it in huge frustration. It was a private remark. It was not in public. If it was in public, I would have said that's hugely insensitive. It was a private remark to express frustration. He might just as easily have said, I'd rather die than have another lockdown. Nobody would have taken that literally. So I don't think you need to take expressions too literally. It was just like all the nonsense with James Dyson and the ventilators. The opposition tried to make something of that. The press tried to make something of that. What did it matter? The country wanted the ventilators.
Well, you could argue it mattered because other companies who were offering ventilators didn't have the Prime Minister's personal phone number and didn't have the leader of the country saying, don't worry, I'll sort it.
All that mattered was getting the ventilators. And I'm
really?
On his side.
All that mattered?
All that mattered was getting the ventilators in the situation that we were in at the time. And he was taking decisions just as he did with the vaccines. He ordered them before any of them had been produced, never mind approved. He just ordered them because he knew the country needed the vaccines. And in this case, he knew the country needed the ventilators. And sometimes you have to cut corners. And it isn't as if James Dyson was really
Здравствуйте, граждане, здравствуйте. Как вас сегодня много.
With a big record of success.
So, and look, there are arguments.
Уже прям аж целых два, слушайте. Такими темпами я прям в топы выбьюсь скоро. Рад вас приветствовать. И что же вы, интересно, не спите в эту чудесную ночь? Да что за чертовщина? Каждый раз, когда переключаюсь на такой вид... Да что там за проказник сзади? Ой. Все прямо жаждут подкрасться ко мне. Ну что хорошего скажете? Что может мне сказать хорошего Небелорд, я знаю. Итак. Судя по нашей хреновой погоде, будем все лето ходить в ушанках. Но я думаю, тебя это не очень волнует, потому что она всегда при тебе.
I've only got 2 minutes left with you, Anne, and thanks for your time tonight.
Okay.
Let me just get your response to what the former chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, Sir Alistair Graham, told me. Here's a little bit of what he told me earlier.
Well, I think he's been quite casual in his approach to standards issues. I do believe in proper process. May need to be speeded up because of a crisis. You may need to push people like the Civil Service Appointments Commission to get you the people you want more quickly than they would normally do. So I am in favour of strong government and proper pressure being brought, but I do think you should keep to the standards that other people have laid down over the years and found to help government rather than hinder it.
Do you think Boris Johnson has helped or hindered the perception that there is integrity in politics?
I think certainly for a certain section of the population, these real question marks about how trustworthy he is in keeping to high level of standards. He's allowed this charge of sleaze to have some substance behind it when he could have avoided it, and it shows he hasn't got a deep concern about maintaining standards, and that I find disappointing.
And that, Anne, from the former chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life.
Yes, and I think as a general statement of principle, it's a very good one. But I say again that we are in a national emergency. Occasionally you do have to cut corners. And above all, we should be focusing on that emergency and not gazing at our own navels, or they shouldn't be gazing at their own navels in Westminster.
OK. Nice to talk to you as always. Thank you very much indeed. That's Anne Widdicombe. And here's the news at 11:30.
Listen on BBC Sounds. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
And with your 5 Live News, I'm Aaron Paul. Latest figures suggest that there's been a large drop in the number of people believed to have COVID-19 across the UK. The Office for National Statistics estimate that about 1 in every 1,000 people had the virus in their latest weekly survey. The actor and director Noel Clarke has said he's deeply sorry that some of his actions affected people in ways he said he did not intend or realise. He made his statement after 20 women made allegations of harassment and bullying against him. Mr. Clarke said he would seek professional help, but he once again vehemently denied any sexual misconduct or criminal wrongdoing. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has promised a thorough investigation into last night's crush at a crowded religious festival in which at least 45 people died. Children were among the victims. Dozens are continuing to be treated for injuries. A man who raided a McDonald's with a fake gun and demanded nuggets has been jailed. 22-year-old Rudy Batten from Bristol pleaded guilty to 2 counts of robbery, 2 counts of having an imitation firearm, and was sentenced to 6 years in jail. In sport, and let's start with tonight's live action where Leicester came from behind to grab a draw at Southampton. That despite the Saints playing 80 minutes of the game with 10 men following Yannick Vestergaard's red card. James Ward-Prowse opened the scoring from the penalty spot with Leicester's Johnny Evans equalising 7 minutes later. And speaking to 5 Live after the game, the Southampton head coach Ralph Hasenhüttl felt a point was very much deserved but wasn't too pleased with his side sending off.
I think it was a deserved point definitely for us because we were punished in a situation. I think when they argue is that it was a 100% goal chance. For me it wasn't, because he placed the ball back to the goalkeeper and Vardy had never control over the ball, so I don't think that he had a 100% goal chance in that moment, and this was the official statement from the referees, and this is for me not okay.
In the other football this evening, Cambridge United missed the chance to clinch promotion from League 2 as they were beaten 5-4 in a thriller at Harrogate. To rugby league, and there were wins for Catalan Dragons and St Helens this evening. In our commentary game, Castleford Tigers returned to winning ways, beating Salford Red Devils 28-18. Dave Woods has more.
Castleford back to winning ways, but Salford made it tough for them. The Tigers took an early lead with a Greg Eden try, but any thoughts of an easy night ahead was stamped out when first Kev Brown and then Andy Ackers crossed for the Red Devils. The Cas took control in the second half. Chase Blair and Jake Truman romping over for scores, and the goal kicking of Danny Richardson taking the game away from Salford.
Crossing code to rugby union, and England's women ran out 15-17 winners over France in their friendly. The game, however, was abandoned in the second half owing to floodlight failure, with the referees awarding England victory at Lille. In the IPL, Punjab Kings beat the Royal Challengers Bangalore by 34 runs, KL Rahul scoring 91 off of 57 to secure the victory. Meanwhile, Gloucestershire beat Kent by 10 wickets in the county championship. At the World Snooker Championship in Sheffield a short time ago, Stuart Bingham was leading Mark Selby by 12 frames to 11. Meanwhile, in the other semi, Kyron Wilson will resume 10-6 up against Sean Murphy. 17 is the target for a place in the final. Sporting organisations and athletes across the UK have begun a 4-day boycott of social media. The blackout aims to highlight abuse suffered online. Earlier, and the former Manchester City and QPR defender Neda Manua told the BBC the measures he had taken to try and restrict potential online abuse.
As a black football player, you receive a very specific type of abuse from some people. It's been interesting because I see all the upsides of having a big social media account, the interaction with fans and stuff, whether it's joking around or talking about things which you're doing, seeing what they're doing, competitions, all that stuff. But for me, I've chosen to have a private account.
Meanwhile, Manchester United have confirmed that they've banned 6 fans for sending racist abuse to Tottenham forward Son Heung-min. Chelsea have also banned a fan for 10 years for posting anti-Semitic messages online. And in Formula 1, Lewis Hamilton was fastest in second practice ahead of Red Bull's Max Verstappen at the Portuguese Grand Prix. It's the first time this season that Hamilton has topped a practice session. And that's your latest from BBC Sport.
BBC 5 Live, the voice of the UK.
Coming up this May on 5 Live and 5 Live Sports Extra. The FA Cup, Europa League and Champions League finals.
Bayern Munich have won it.
The Monaco Grand Prix.
He put it in the gravel, he stuck it in the wall. The championship fight is absolutely on fire.
French Open tennis.
An ace from Nadal, who is a champion in Paris for a 13th time.
And the Premier League comes to a close.
And he drills it in low and hard and it's in!
May on 5 Live and 5 Live Sports Extra.
BBC Radio 5 Live.
I listen every day.
I trust the presenters. Let's talk about some of the big business impact. The voice of the UK, Stephen Nolan. BBC Radio 5 Live.
Well, let's return to the story about clubbing returning to the UK with a huge test event that finished earlier this hour. 3,000 clubbers took to the dance floor at Bramley Moor Dock Warehouse for the first of 2 big dance events there this weekend. Ticket holders didn't need to wear masks or socially distance inside, but they did need to have tested negative for coronavirus by having a lateral flow test beforehand. It's the latest part of the event's research programme, a series of government trials on crowd safety during COVID. Earlier,
Необычно много народу этой ночью. Поболтать, наверное, что ли? А только даже как-то неприлично получается. Ну, я догадываюсь, почему. Во-первых, пятница, во-вторых, всякие там майские праздники впереди. Видимо, поэтому народ решил посмотреть, что это за чудо-юдо такое, Иберия. Я сказать, что, как и все прочее, у чехов это обновление удалось. Есть, конечно, у них вот... В основном я, конечно, хвалю Евротрек. Но есть у них кое-чего, за что я бы критиковал. Это вот однообразные вот эти вот... Как назвать? Парковки, заправки. Понятное дело, что в реальной жизни они тоже похожи одна на другую, но они не прям там под копирку, особенно на автобанах в Европе. Понятное дело, они какую-то индивидуальность придают этому. Едешь, допустим, по Великобритании, у них там так сделано. Едешь здесь по Испании, у них эдак сделано. Где-нибудь в Эстонии, они вообще там надо черти куда там заезжать, вообще неудобно. В том куске России, что был, тоже не очень удобно. Наверное, когда выйдет сердце России, там вообще будет кирдык. Я уже видел там скриншоты их, эти машины без покрышек стоят, меня порадовали. Но они, наверное, там, как всегда, они реалистично передают некоторые реальные существующие места. Я думаю, те, кто играет в Eurotrack и живут там, где это будет происходить, увидят для себя много знакомых мест. Ну, в общем, короче, хорошее обновление. Я им, можно сказать, в общем и целом доволен. Особенно хорошо у них получается вот эти все побережья. Ну, про American я вообще молчу, там вообще красота. Там все красивое. А здесь, конечно, сука, эта игра ушла раньше. У них самые начальные были города, вроде как громкие названия, там Рим, Париж и все такое, но ну, были похожи один на другой, какие-то там склады непонятные, все, ничего, никакой индивидуальности, ничего. Но позже, намного позже, они писали в своем блоге, что переработают эти города, и таки переработали. И они стали больше похожи, собственно, на то, что они хотели изначально. То есть на нормальные европейские, города. Естественно, к Иберии они уже разошлись вовсю, в хорошем смысле этого слова. Ну и сделали уже, да, все как следует. Сейчас я могу сказать, что я уже почти всю Португалию изъездил, и очень-очень живописный, замечательный край. Португалия. Одна из немногих стран, где я не бывал в Европе лично. А так я уже говорил много-много стримов назад, что когда я ехал в пригороде Стокгольма, вот здесь, ну там в основном-то все вот эти шоссе и автобаны, они ничем не примечательны, потому что, что там, да, там природа по краям какая-то хорошая, овцы пасутся, там коровы, еще что-то. А там я прямо увидел некую там статую, и она прямо реально вот один в один, как в реале. Просто вот это вот место. Оно мне запомнилось, и оно было прямо такое же. Вот. Это замечательно. Они не просто черти что делают, а именно реально существующие места. Так, ладно. Я устал болтать. Я буду дальше слушать радио. А вы как хотите.
Yeah.
And they're dancing and they're clubbing and they're doing whatever they do.
Yeah.
How would
It
that
sounds
play
really
out in
small,
terms
doesn't
of
it?
the
It sounds
spread
really
of that
small.
disease?
So this is a disease that's spread by aerosol transmission. Let me give you an example. There was, you may have heard of this because it's quite a famous example now. There was a choir practice in Washington in March of last year when the community rate was thought to be low. And I think there were 60 people who attended choir. There was one person infected who, infected most of the people in that choir, 3 people got hospitalized and 2 people died. So we know in COVID, most people don't actually give rise to infection. But what we get are these super spreading events sometimes where one person can infect many, many people, especially in environments like this when it's crowded and there's less distancing. We're not just having one event, we're having multiple events where, for each event, a few people can get in. At some point, you're going to have a super spreading event. I mean, we saw that with the Cheltenham races as well, where, there were cases linked to that, which potentially led to community transmission following that, although we didn't have good test and trace to pick up most of that at that point in time. So we don't know what impact it had. So, unfortunately, even 3 people in one event is a risk, particularly when you're having many such events. And this is an infection that can super spread with aerosol transmission.
But this is a government-approved trial.
I mean, that's what puzzles me. I would really like to see the protocol and the ethical approval because, I've applied for ethical approval for many studies and I cannot understand how this could have been approved. I mean, we heard Professor Monks talk about, we're trying to keep people safe. We're looking for measures that keep people safe. I mean, the thing is, we've been studying this for 15 months. We know what keeps people safe. Social distancing, ventilation, masking. These are known measures now that protect people. And I don't know what ethics committee would allow us to take them away from a group. It's sort of like saying, let's look at whether seatbelts work when we know they do and have people in a speeding car and say, suspend the use of seatbelts and then look at the end of the trial and see how many people die. I mean, the outcome of this trial is how many people get infected. And, some of those people who get infected might develop long COVID. Some of their relatives might get sick. Some of them might have relatives who die. And who's liable for that when that happens? And, when we know what protects people, how can we take away known measures that protect people in the midst of a pandemic when we still do have significant community transmission happening and those people are not vaccinated?
But isn't the risk extremely low given the age profile of the people and the lateral flow test? So I know that the age profile is not a total defence. I know that the lateral flow tests are not a total defence. But the combination of both, does that not make the risk extremely low?
No, it doesn't. It's not just one event. There are multiple events happening. Death is not the only risk, right? And these people have relatives as well. So there are more than 1 million people living with long COVID, and the majority of them are young, healthy people in that age group. So 1 in 5 people who get infected in that age group will develop symptoms that last more than 5 weeks. They'll have relatives. They can take infection into their households. And this is exactly the sort of place where it happens. People are talking loudly. There's a lot of aerosols being pushed out. People are in a very crowded indoor environment. So if there's a super spreading event, you would expect a large number of people to get infected, not just a few people, because of the sort of nature of this disease, like we've seen again and again in these sort of environments. I don't understand this experiment because we've had so many real world situations where this has happened, unfortunately, because we didn't know that much about the virus or protections weren't in place. And we've seen huge levels of transmission just with a few people or even one person being infected, but in these specific environments because they really provide a fertile ground for transmission.
The Times tomorrow, Deepti, their front page has the following headline: Hug friends in a fortnight. The story reads that cases have dropped 40% in a week. Family and friends will be allowed to hug in just over a fortnight under the first significant easing of social distancing restrictions. That's what the Times is reporting.
Yeah, I really worry about this sort of reporting. I feel like we've sort of decided that because about 20% of our population is fully vaccinated and 50% is partially vaccinated, if we open up fully at this point in time, things will be fine. And people keep citing Israel without realizing that Israel has taken a very different route. They've been very, very careful about containing community transmission during vaccine rollout. They opened their schools only after 80% of their adult population were vaccinated, and even after that, children were wearing masks in school, socially distancing. They had mandates outdoors and indoors for wearing masks, and it's only last week, I think, that the outdoor mandate was dropped. So, people think that because Israel is doing well, we can, open up now. But Israel was very, very careful about how it controlled community transmission and, took measures that allowed that to happen. If we open up now the way we are, cases can still surge back, and we can undo a lot of what's been done, especially with this new variant spreading. Yeah.
We're seeing lots of positive statistics, though, and maybe you can interpret them for us.
Absolutely.
The Times article, for example, saying that there were 54,200 people living with COVID-19 in the week ending April the 17th. That's about 1 in 1,000 people, the lowest figure since the week to September the 5th of last year. 22 million people, equivalent to 1 in 3 of the population, live in areas that have not reported a single COVID-19 death for a month.
Yes, absolutely. And we know that deaths do lag cases. So what I want to say there is, so this is exactly where we were around September 3rd of last year. And in 4 weeks' time, from September 3rd, we were essentially at a point in time that we need to lock down when schools opened. And I know things are very positive now, but let me tell you, when schools opened in March, and this is something I don't see discussed in the media a lot, in 2 weeks' time, cases among children rose very, very rapidly, so that they had the highest infection rates across all age groups, and are also
Where is that, sorry?
That's in England. And in Scotland, infection rates in children rose about 4 times since 22nd Feb. And what's apparent if you look at the data is that in Scotland, of course, you saw an increase in R about 1 briefly. And in England, also, you saw R creeping at 1. And then Easter break happened. And Easter break, all the infections fell again, including children, right? We only had schools open for 2 weeks. And even then, we saw a big impact on infection children. But it was only 2 weeks. And after Easter break, all those drops resumed. Now the schools open again without many mitigations in place, and the government is even planning to remove masks. We expect to see those rises resume because they were happening in March, but weren't being talked about a lot. And in September, this is exactly what happened. You know, we had infection rates at this level in September, and in 4 weeks' time, they had quadrupled. And I'm not saying that will happen to that extent now, because you know, we have a level of vaccination in the population, but it's not going to protect a huge amount against transmission in those younger age groups that are not vaccinated.
Yeah, but it might not prevent COVID being transmitted to those younger age groups. But statistically, the vast majority of those younger age groups will have a mild to moderate illness, and will get past it and will be okay. And we've got to open up sometime. And then there's another school of thought,
I'm not saying
there?
It's indefinite. I'm not saying it's indefinite at all. I'm just
saying. But are you saying it's premature?
I am saying it's premature, yeah. And I do disagree that young people don't get affected. I mean, I just want to say, not only are there more than 1 million people living with long COVID, and the majority of them being young and healthy, 500,000 people have had symptoms for more than 6 months. So it's not a disease that, you know, when I say 5 weeks, you know, people think, oh yeah, okay, fine. That's just like a bad flu. But 500,000 people who are living in the UK now, most of them young, without pre-existing illnesses, have had symptoms for 6 months or more. And that's not mild.
Someone's just tweeted and said, do we really have to listen to this doctor on 5 Live every week? She just wants to see us locked up forever.
No, I don't. I absolutely don't. In fact, I mean, that's the sort of thing we've been trying to prevent. Because the way you prevent being locked down forever is controlling transmission when you need to control it. We are going to have a large proportion of our population vaccinated very, very soon. We could wait for that. We could bring our community transmission lower and have, you know, things like mitigations in schools. These are simple measures that are not lockdowns, but would make a huge difference and keep everyone safer. We could fix our test, trace, isolate, and support system, which is not lockdown, but would really reduce the impact of a lot of things that are happening now as we open up. But you know, if we don't do that, then yes, we might end up in another lockdown, not because I want us to. I'm trying to prevent that happening. But, you know, unfortunately, you know, our government has done this again and again and again.
But the basic messages that I'm hearing are, Deepti, that it is, again, relatively safe in an outdoor environment, especially coming into the hotter weather, because that is the best time of the year. If we're going to have some type of a year to ease restrictions, it's better in the warm weather. So if we've got more and more of our population vaccinated, if we're getting into a spring-summer period where the weather is hotter, and if a lot of the permitted activities are outside, is that not a very good environment to give a population at least some respite from these horrendous
agree.
restrictions.
I mean, I'm not saying that people shouldn't meet up outdoors in a socially distanced way. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that, crowded events like this, indoors or outdoors, people need to take precautions. Like there needs to be wearing masks, there needs to be social distancing, particularly in those indoor environments, and good ventilation. I mean, that's just asking people to take precautions. And I think, yes, the risk is much lower outdoors, there's no doubt. And it is good for people to go outdoors and meet each other outdoors, but in a safe way.
Can I ask something on the ventilation issue?
Yeah.
How is it logical, or indeed safe, that you go to an airport and they are requiring social distancing in the airport, and then you're brought onto the plane, and you're brought onto a packed plane where the middle seat is not taken out, and while you've been socially distancing possibly, from 2 or 3 people who in an airport, now you're sitting in a plane with 100 or 150 other people all packed in. How's that logical?
Yeah. It's not safe. I mean, we've seen a lot of transmission happen on planes. When people quarantine, for example, in Australia and New Zealand, we know people get infected on planes. So, I mean, I would never argue that it's a safe environment. Of course, when people need to travel for essential purposes, they need to travel. We can't make that environment 100% safe. I think they do use portable filtration devices, etc., to try to make it as safe as possible. But there have been so many events of spread on planes that we know of.
Here's Neil in Liverpool calling us tonight. Hello, Neil.
Oh, hello, Steve. How are you doing?
Go ahead, sir.
Right. So you did a brilliant interview with Professor Monk, and it was most interesting because you got him to agree that these 3,000 clubbers were guinea pigs, and it was an experiment. But he also said, well, they were all made aware of the circumstances, but their families, their brothers, their sisters, the teachers of their brothers and sisters, their parents, their grandparents, their work colleagues, they haven't given their consent, and they could be unwitting victims if there is any spread by this. If you go back a year, Stephen, when there was the Liverpool-Madrid football match, and the Spanish fans crowded the city centre, and there was a definite spread as a result of that, the close contact with people, and that's the last thing that we want to see again. I just hope that they know what they're doing.
Well, it's a government-approved trial. I keep saying this.
Well, that doesn't impress me. That doesn't impress me at all. A government, we are guinea pigs in this city, and the people of Liverpool weren't asked if they wanted to go ahead with this experiment in our city, because we're all unless everyone's vaccinated, none of us is vaccinated. Well, the same goes for that. One guinea pig, we're all guinea pigs in this experiment, because those people are going to mingle around the city from tomorrow.
Neil,
I
thank you very much
completely agree with that point. I completely agree with that point, yeah.
Well, I'm glad about that.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Deepti, we've only 3 or 4 minutes left tonight. Tell us about the Indian variant and where that is in our knowledge about it.
We don't know as much as we probably need to know about it. Unfortunately, it's a variant that's increased in frequency or become dominant in many states in India at the same time that infections have risen exponentially or very quickly in those areas, which makes us feel it is possibly linked to the increase in that variant. I think what's really worrying is that in some states we're seeing that variant sort of rise in frequency against a background of the UK variant. And we have very small numbers to look at, so we don't know whether this is something that we can believe yet or not. But if that is the case, then that is reason to be really concerned. I think it's thought that it is likely to be more transmissible. Possibly it can, evade immunity to some extent, but we don't know this yet, and we don't have real data on vaccines so far.
So why are you saying possibly it can evade? Surely we simply don't know.
Well, in the laboratory, it's been shown it has mutations that have been shown to be associated with evading immune responses to antibodies in the laboratory. But what that translates to in the real world is really hard to know right now.
So how will... Because there will always be more new variants, won't there? That's the nature of what happens with any virus. We've learned that from you guys as well. These viruses mutate all of the time. So are we just going to have to be on our guard all of the time? Like, at what point do we feel free? Because it's not even when all the population is vaccinated, is it? Because a new variant could come along at any time and evade the vaccine. So when am I getting my sense of freedom back in this country?
I know many people will disagree with me, but this is why I really think elimination efforts are important, because that is the only way we can prevent this. Otherwise, as you say, there's so much uncertainty about the future. And the only way we can prevent virus adaptation is actually to prevent transmission. And that's sadly the truth. And the only countries that have succeeded to not have a variant problem are countries like Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia, who haven't imported this variant, don't have it in the community, and don't have new variants evolving. Because I think the variants are a huge threat to our future and our vaccine strategy. And unless we deal with them, and we can deal with them, we are going to be dealing with a future that's very uncertain.
But those countries which have eliminated it, that you've just quoted, surely they're susceptible to a new variant as soon as they open up international travel again.
Yes, I mean, that is a big problem of how they're going to deal with that. And I think that's why they've chosen a vaccine strategy with vaccines that are known to work against all variants at the moment. And, they're really focused on sort of having this multivalent vaccines to boost as well.
Finally, Deepti, back to where we started. I have 30 seconds. Would you be calling on the government to stop these approved trials where they're bringing thousands of people together?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's completely unethical, and I have no idea how they got approved.
Okay, short and sweet. Deepti, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We're going to have a look at all the front pages of our national newspapers next. Here's our number, 08085 909 693. The Midnight News coming up right now on the BBC.
The voice of the UK. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at midnight. This is Nick Qureshi. Coronavirus infections in the UK are back to levels seen at the end of last summer, with around 1 in 1,000 people infected. According to the Office for National Statistics, cases are 20 times lower than they were at the peak in January. But Professor Andrew Pollard, who led the Oxford University vaccine programme, said there was still a need for caution.
I think it's extremely unlikely that we will have a resurgence of disease to the extent we've seen before, because we've got a large number of people vaccinated. But I think we can be certain of one thing, is that this virus will continue to transmit, and we're not safe here or around the world until everyone is protected from the virus.
The actor Noel Clarke has apologised for some of his past actions, but has continued to deny allegations of sexual misconduct. Sky said it had halted its work with the star after 20 women accused him of harassment and bullying. He said he'd seek professional help, but rejected claims of criminal wrongdoing. Israel's Prime Minister has promised an inquiry into a crush at a Jewish festival, which left at least 45 people dead and around 150 injured. At the scene of the incident, Benjamin Netanyahu said it had been one of the worst peacetime disasters the country had ever known. Prince William, who is president of the FA, has joined football clubs and other sporting bodies in a 4-day boycott of social media in protest at online abuse. It's hoped the demonstration will encourage firms to do more to prevent racist and sexist content from being posted and punish those behind it. Tony Burnett is CEO of Kick It Out, which campaigns to end racism and discrimination in football.
Even before the lockdown kicked in, we were seeing significant increases in reported incidents based on discrimination. So this isn't just online. The fact that we've not been in grounds and we haven't had grassroots football, I think is hiding the fact that this is a problem in society.
Detectives investigating the murder of a police community support officer say they have no clear suspects in the case. Julia James, who was 53, was found in woodland near her home in the village of Snowdown in Kent. Clubbers have returned to the dance floor for the first time since the pandemic began, as part of trials to see how venues can reopen. 3,000 people attended the first of 2 events at a venue in Liverpool. They weren't required to socially distance or wear face coverings, but did need a negative COVID test before being allowed in. These people were at the event.
It feels like coming back to normality, finally.
The freedom is coming back.
Finally, after so long being in lockdown and not doing anything, we have a little bit of normality.
I think it's a very smart way, like, to bringing back the old parties. Like, not like without any responsibility, but with the test before, test after, and all of that.
And a look at the weather. Dry for many tonight, but showers will persist in the north. Sunshine and showers tomorrow. BBC News. It's 3 minutes past midnight.
5 Live Breakfast.
GCHQ is asking for people with dyslexia to specifically apply for positions there because they can see often patterns that a neuroatypical brain can't see. Morning to Stuart from Chalfont at Giles. I have it. I run a successful company and I've always thought I can understand the consequences of things better than most.
Alan Turing, he's the best known employee of the security services with dyslexia, of course.
The social media accounts of sports teams and organisations across the UK will fall silent as they take part in a social media boycott in an effort to combat online abuse and discrimination. Former West Ham defender Anton Ferdinand.
It is sad to get to this point, but this is part of a plan to try and eradicate it from our society.
5 Live Breakfast. Back Monday morning from 6. Stephen Nolan on BBC Radio 5 Live.
Tonight in the show, do the public care about how the Prime Minister paid for the refurbishment of his flat?
And it's perfectly true that when you're somebody like Boris, you speak as you feel at the moment. You don't necessarily act in a circumspect fashion the whole time. So there may well be perceived as skeletons, which may be nothing of the sort. But again, I say to you, there are more important things to worry about.
3,000 people clubbing in Liverpool in a government-approved trial. No social distancing, no mask wearing. Described as low risk. But an epidemiologist has told the Nolan Show tonight she cannot believe this was approved.
We've seen huge levels of transmission just with a few people or even one person being infected, but in these specific environments because they really provide a fertile ground for transmission.
The headlines. The Times. Hug friends in a fortnight, citing a drop of 40% in the number of coronavirus cases in a week. The Telegraph says holidays will get the green light from May the 17th, but tests and quarantine will continue for most destinations. The Daily Express says the Prime Minister will publish a green list of safe holiday countries next week. Here's how to get in touch.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. Call free 08085 909 693. Text 85058. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. Plus, see our privacy notice. bbc.co.uk/5live. Stephen Nolan on BBC Radio 5 Live.
Mohammed Shafiq, the broadcaster, commentator, is helping us through the papers tonight. Hello, Mohammed.
Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, good morning. Hug friends in a fortnight, says the Times. They're talking about family and friends allowed to hug in just over a fortnight. Ministers expected to approve the next stage of the roadmap from May 17th. That will include, says the Times, allowing people to have physical contact with friends and family from other households for the first time in more than a year.
Yeah, this is going to be a significant moment for the country. Obviously, the cases are coming down, the deaths are obviously in double figures, but actually lots of people around the country, Stephen, have made huge sacrifices. You know, I talk about myself. I'm not giving my mum a hug since last March, so I'm really excited. So many people will be there. You know, we're going to get to May the 17th and we'll be able to see that indoor mixing, but also for those restrictions to be relaxed. I mean, we're going to be more cautious and we're just going to be clear about people getting the vaccine and making sure that they protect themselves and their families.
What do you make about this gig in Liverpool tonight that we've been talking about a lot on our programme this evening? Government-approved trial, 3,000 clubbers, no social distancing, no face masks. They get lateral flow tests before they go in. The scientific advisor for the event saying, look, this is relative low risk. And an epidemiologist countering that, saying, how did this get approved?
Well, I think there's some truth in regards to the lateral flow testing, because they're not very accurate, aren't they? I mean, if people are having a PCR test and then going in, you can understand the safety implications of that. But, you know, the country is in a much better position because we follow the guidance and we have a government that has been driven by the science and not by opportunist political initiatives. And I think, that's where we are. And I think this will help lots of the night economy to, look at what they need to do to make their venues safe and to do that in a safe way. And so, obviously, I'm sure that the government wouldn't approve that. The scientists wouldn't have allowed it to go ahead without those safeguards being put in place.
I'm just looking through quite a few of the papers here, Mohammed. Boris Johnson might be slightly relieved that the Downing Street flat saga and the Dominic Cummings saga doesn't seem to be on many of the front pages I can see.
No, they're not. I think he's going to be mightily relieved in Downing Street tonight that the papers seem to be wanting to move on. And obviously we'll have to see what the Electoral Commission comes out. But the Electoral Commission generally tend to take a long time to come round to making their decision. So it'll be interesting to see what they have to do. And then there's pressure on the Parliamentary Standards Committee to look into this as well. And the Standards Commissioner being put pressure on from the opposition to see if there's an investigation in regards to a declaration, parliamentary declaration in terms of their interest.
Do you think the public care? You're an opponent of the Prime Minister, so you might want them to care. But if they're trying to keep their jobs, concentrating on their health, struggling in the middle of this pandemic, do they care if some rich Tory donor, we don't know this is the case, but it's an if some Tory donor has lent the Prime Minister money, do they care?
I think if you're talking to people who are defending the Prime Minister and his actions in regards to this or alleged activity, then they will say, who cares? But I think on the whole, it feeds into this narrative that the Tories...
Наконец-то, наконец-то я его припарковал. Как же меня задолбало вот то, что они там между двумя грузовиками. Тот рандом, который так распорядился, я ненавижу его.
Did the donor came forward and help him pay for this? Because this is not just any ordinary building. This is the, home of government. This is the Prime Minister's residence, which is obviously a public interest in regards to this. So I think lots of people will be still interested in this particular story.
We've done quite a comprehensive interview tonight with Sir Alistair Graham. So let's sit back and listen to this. Sir Alistair is a former chair of the Committee on Standards and Public Life. I asked him if the sleaze tag is justified.
The fact that the Prime Minister has been able to provoke 4 inquiries into the refurbishment of his flat, plus the other problems that have arisen through appointments made without due process and contracts made without going into tender, has undoubtedly allowed the sleaze tag to have some substance behind it.
Well, how do we know there's substance before an inquiry?
Well, as far as the flat is concerned, no, we have to wait till the 4 inquiries have completed their report. But we do know, as far as the other matters I mentioned, that very large contracts were made without going through the usual tendering process. We do know appointments have been made without going through an open competitive process. So there is some existing substance as far as some of the items that people attach to the sleaze label.
And Sir Alistair, have you sympathy with what the Prime Minister might argue and his supporters might argue, which is there's nothing normal about a pandemic and the end justifies the means when there's the potential for many thousands of deaths?
Well, it's an easy argument to make, and one can understand that being used as we have been a major crisis, though I do think standards of behaviour, standards of approach to government business are there for good times and bad times. So I don't entirely sympathise with the Prime Minister on the argument that he's been making. We're about good government in this country, and good government does require the appropriate ethical standards should be in place.
But obviously, Sir Alistair, that good government ultimately in a pandemic means saving as many lives as possible. Now, if a Prime Minister is faced with going through proper due process, rules which have been laid down not for at a time when a virus might be overwhelming the health service and bringing it to its knees, can that Prime Minister not cut corners, as many corners as he wants, if it is getting ventilators into the mouths, into the throats of people who are literally struggling to breathe? Why not?
Well, because in fact, if you're going through a process of trying to get these things, for example, the arrangements that were made with Mr. Dyson, in the end he didn't produce one piece of equipment at all, where there were I've read about other companies who were willing and able to produce the equipment that was required, but they didn't have the elite fast-track process that it appeared as far as this government is concerned. So I think it's too easy to play the pandemic argument. And of course, if the Prime Minister is so absolutely confident of how well they've done, and clearly as somebody who's had 2 jabs, I am grateful that the NHS has been very successful as far as the vaccination programme is concerned. But why doesn't he agree, now that we've reached a reasonable stage in the pandemic as far as our country is concerned, but not for others, why doesn't he agree, as many people have suggested across all parties, that an inquiry should be held to learn the lessons of how this pandemic has been carried out?
Well, Labour MPs are calling for the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards to look into the flat finances. What power does that Commissioner have in reality?
Well, as far as the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards is concerned, she in fact can, and she first of all has to agree to hold an investigation. And we haven't heard yet that she's going to do that. All we know is that Margaret Hodge, who's a very senior Labour politician, has written to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards asking her to investigate the matter. So it may be slightly early to jump to conclusions that an investigation is going to take place there. And she's told us, I believe, that she won't tell us her decision on that until after the May elections. But of course, the most important investigation is that by the Electoral Commission, and they of course have a great powers to demand to see emails and all sorts of text messages as part of its investigation.
If at the end of the day, and it is an if the Nolan principles have been broken, does it follow that the Prime Minister should resign?
Not necessarily, because actually, as far as if he's breached the ministerial code is concerned, then he's the one who actually decides. But if that was to be found to happen, that would be a serious matter, and he may well come under pressure from his own backbenchers if he's found to have acted improperly and broken the ministerial code, or in fact even if the Conservative Party, of which he is the leader, is found to have broken the electoral law or even committed a criminal offence which has to be investigated by the Metropolitan Police.
What would the criminal offence be?
Well, I'm not an expert on electoral law, but as I understand it, if there are certain breaches of the legislation which came out in 2000, then they can decide that there has been a criminal offence as laid down in the law, but they don't decide whether it's proved or not. It has to be referred to the police for a separate investigation.
Do you think the public cares about who has paid for the renovation of a flat as long as it's not them?
Well, I think they care that the Prime Minister should deal with matters in a proper fashion. I think the experience of previous scandals is that initially people do say, oh, well, they care, much more concerned about their standard of living or in the current situation in what's happening as far as the pandemic is concerned. But if sufficient of these matters begin to pile up, then the sleaze tax becomes very dangerous for a Prime Minister and his government. So it can take some time before these matters really get through to the public and affecting how they see that government. But it may well be they don't care a toss, and that we'll get some idea in the elections that are taking place next week as to what the public mood is. And some of the polls show that the Conservative Party are well ahead of Labour, and therefore they may do very well and be comforted in that. But he's still got 4 inquiries taking place, which could produce some difficult results.
What would you want to see with regards to the flat?
Well, all I've argued is that he should come out and tell the truth. I really can't understand why he's taken all this time and allowed the actual scandal to build up. Why didn't he come out? And if he'd said, yes, given his financial situation, he had to borrow some money or seek a loan from somebody to complete the refurbishment, then I suspect if he'd said that early on, people couldn't care less, though most ordinary people would think you should have the money in the bank or the credit available before you start a refurbishment. Most of us like to know what it's going to cost and whether we can pay for it. So it does look like rather poor husbandry at a minimum. But I think it's...
And he would have been required to register if he got a loan. Because Boris Johnson is sticking to the line that he ultimately paid for it, which leaves the question, yeah, but did someone give him the money? Lend him the money, put the money into his possession so that he could pay for it. Now, if that happened, where does that have to be declared? And what do the rules say about how quickly it has to be declared?
Well, he has to demonstrate that he's not beholden to somebody. It is a key part of our principles that he has to, in fact, tell us if he's received a loan, so we know that there's no, in future, if any decisions are taken which might benefit the individual that lent the money, that is transparent and above board, and we can see whether the Prime Minister or other ministers have acted in a proper way. So it's ensuring that he is not taking a sum of money in which, in some other way, he has to pay back in due course.
Do you believe Boris Johnson is being transparent?
No, I don't. I think he could have come out and explained his personal situation, and people, perhaps for the reason you were arguing earlier, that he's been dealing with a pandemic crisis. And I think if he'd been open and transparent, the issue would have been put to bed very quickly. So I think he has brought these inquiries upon himself, and by doing things differently, he could have avoided them.
Anything that Dominic Cummings alleges, in terms of the public mood towards Mr. Cummings, it's not appropriate for me to comment on that, but it is a statement of fact that the public will know Dominic Cummings to be a man who has said that he went on a 60-odd mile round trip with his child in the back seat to test his eyesight. Think the public will believe him?
Well, I don't know, but if you look at the blog that was published, I thought the most important part related to the end of the blog, where he was stressing very strongly that he was in favour of an early and full inquiry into how the pandemic was dealt with early on, and whether indeed lives could have been saved at that point. And if he has some real hard-edged evidence which demonstrate that the government were not as competent as they could have been and lives could have been saved, then that might have a serious impact in such an inquiry, and the inquiry, whoever carries it out, might believe him if I say there's evidence to support it.
It's also emerged that Boris Johnson's personal mobile phone number has been available online for 15 years. Does that worry you?
Yes, I think so. I think some people have argued that it does raise security issues. And once again, I'm just surprised. Why would you impose that on yourself, that very large numbers of people can get a hold of you or text you or send seek to talk to you by having your mobile number? I just think it's rather strange behaviour by a Prime Minister who you would have thought wouldn't want to be overwhelmed in this way.
At the end of the day, Sir Alistair, we're talking to you tonight because you're the former chair of the Committee of Standards in Public Life. What do you think Boris Johnson has done during his tenure as Prime Minister to contribute to the public thinking that there is integrity in the standards of public life?
Well, I think he's been quite casual in his approach to standards issues. I do believe in proper process. May need to be speeded up because of a crisis. You may need to push people like the Civil Service Appointments Commission to get you the people you want more quickly than they would normally do. So I am in favour of strong government and proper pressure being brought, but I do think you should keep to the standards that other people have laid down over the years and found to help government rather than hinder it.
Do you think Boris Johnson has helped or hindered the perception that there is integrity in politics?
I think certainly for a certain section of the population, these real question marks about how trustworthy he is in keeping to high level of standards.
But you're in the population. What do you think?
I think personally that he's allowed this charge of sleaze to have some substance behind it when he could have avoided it, and it shows he hasn't got a deep concern about maintaining standards, and that I find disappointing.
And so, if any of these people in offices of, commissioners want to do something about this, what do they do now? What's their next step if they want to get tough with the Prime Minister?
Well, of course, the Prime Minister is the top politician, has enormous power, and has a majority of 80 in the House of Commons, so he can do a great deal on his own. But senior civil servants can alert him if in fact they think certain steps are not within the standards regime or are not in terms of good government. But as we can see, he's one of the things I'm disappointed in, that he's appointed Lord Geit as the advisor to the Prime Minister on ministerial standards, and it had been suggested by a fair number of people at a senior level that they should strengthen the powers of that advisor. For example, if he had concerns, he should be able to initiate an investigation without necessarily the Prime Minister's agreement, but that's not going to be the situation. He can express his concerns in private to the Prime Minister, and he cannot make those concerns public. Now, I think that is unfortunate, and I think it would be better if he'd taken the advice of people like the Cabinet Secretary and strengthened the powers of Lord Guide to be a strong ministerial advisor on ministerial standards to him.
Begs the question, why hasn't he done that, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Well, because he wants to keep total control. He doesn't ever want things to be outside of his control.
Sir Alistair Graham, former chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. Mohammed?
Yeah, I mean, powerful interview there, because this is somebody who was involved in maintaining standards. And can you ever imagine, through the Labour government years, a minister behaving like this, a Prime Minister behaving like this, not being transparent, not telling us where this money's coming from, not telling us transparency in regards to their friends and access that's available. The uproar that
why does it matter?
Well, it matters because honesty matters in politics. Integrity matters. And, you know, if a nurse who's lost her job, or if somebody who's lost their job during this pandemic isn't able to get access to the Prime Minister by, you know, sending them a text message or a WhatsApp number because they happen to have the number because they're a billionaire, I just don't think that's right. And I think the vast majority of people really...
Yeah, but come on, what was that?
that?
You know, the context is important, isn't it? What was that billionaire trying to do? He was trying to get more ventilators into this country, and the Prime Minister was in was at the time where he was exchanging those texts with Dyson. The country needed ventilators.
The country needed the NHS. The country needed public servants. You know, Stephen, this past 14, 15 months, how many hard-working public servants have been serving on the front line? None of them have got access to the Prime Minister the way billionaires have. And so I think people are quite disgusted by that. But because nothing happened, there are no...
Sorry, hold on a minute. How does that make sense? The bottom line, are you telling me that at a time when, you know, there was a shortage of ventilators throughout the world, you don't think a Prime Minister should be responding to someone who makes and can provide ventilators?
Changing the tax code and changing the tax situation for somebody who's decided to base his company in Singapore for whatever reason. I'm not suggesting for a second, Stephen, that there is a sniff of corruption here. I just think, you know, the office of Prime Minister should be above this. And, you know, does that hard-working public servant...
How many lives does that cost? So let's flip it the other way. So the Prime Minister does not try to reach out to people like Dyson for the ventilators. But at what price? It's easy for you to say this now, but at that time, there was a shortage of ventilators.
And there are lots of other companies who came forward to participate and help support the fight against the pandemic. My argument isn't that with that. My argument is, why hasn't anybody else who works so hard got the same sort of access to the Prime Minister or to ministers in the same way? And there's a process you have to follow. I mean, not everybody can pick up the phone and text the Prime Minister. You know, and I just, you know, great that he provided the ventilators. But if it was so easy to change the tax code in the way that the Prime Minister did for James Dyson, then why can't it be changed for hard public servants? Why can't we give them a decent pay rise after all that they've done for the last 14 months? And that's the concern I have. It's about integrity in our politics. And this does not sniff of integrity. And I think it's deeply disturbing.
What's the next story you want to look at, Mohammed?
Yeah, this is obviously the social media boycott, which a number of newspapers, it's in the Mirror and it's in the Telegraph as well. And this is the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, Kate and William, saying that they have joined the social media boycott against online hate. And this is pretty much lots of sports club and other sports players coming together to have a boycott. It was from today, 3 o'clock, till Monday, just to highlight the fact that these tech companies, social media companies, are not tackling hate the abuse that people suffer. I mean, I know you've been a victim of it. I've been a victim of it, and we just kind of develop a thick skin, whilst people are able to publish hatred and innuendos and negative.
And the more they get away with it, these trolls, the more empowered they feel. Then they get this sense of entitlement that in their fantasy world that that they've somehow got rights as trolls.
Yeah, and I think all of us, particularly those of us who are in the public eye and subject to more so you on a more senior level as broadcasters, we get that all the time, and we do get people, and it's absolutely right and proper, Stephen, that you and myself and others in the media business are questioned and challenged. But what isn't right is to pedalise and hate and be derogatory on gender, sexuality, or race or religion matters. And the social media companies have allowed this to flourish on social media. And there have been occasions when people have called me all sorts, Stephen, and I've reported it to Twitter, and they find that it's not breached their guidelines. And so this is a small way in which the issue can be highlighted, and it's great to see so many sports clubs coming together, football clubs coming together to support this, and it's great that the Prince William and Kate are joined in.
Will it make any difference?
I hope it would. I would hope it would, but probably not. No. It's a lot of these anonymous accounts that get set up, and troll accounts that just troll people, and it requires leadership from the social media companies to take action against this. I don't know what the answer is to it, but it's very difficult, and it's very difficult for people who suffer a bereavement, and you see some of the nasty and vicious comments that people will make after the death of somebody, and it's just people don't have that respect anymore, and it's just really sad. I mean, Prince Philip is an example. I mean, some of the stuff that was written about him on social media was very distasteful, just so soon after his death announcement.
Dr. Bill Mitchell was talking to us earlier tonight, Director of Policy at BCS, which is the Chartered Institute for IT, and Heather Burns from the digital campaigning organisation, the Open Rights Group Scotland. They work to protect privacy and free speech rights. Let's have a listen to some of what they said earlier. I put it to Heather that most people, unlike celebrities or well-paid sports stars, simply can't afford to take legal action when they're the victim of abuse or trolling online.
Well, Stephen, we've inadvertently got to the heart of the matter, which is that we seem to have shifted the debate from the point where it's somehow law enforcement and police's responsibility to deal with this to the idea that it is somehow social media's responsibility, and one or two or three major tech companies to take on the role of privatized law enforcement, judge, jury, and prosecution. The point we would make here is that you can do all you want in terms of anonymity registration with social media companies. Ultimately, it comes down to, why don't the police do things? Why don't law enforcement do things? Why aren't actions which are already explicitly illegal offline as well as online being prosecuted and dealt with by the police and law enforcement? And where do we get this idea that somehow social media's job, private businesses' job, are to take on the role that law enforcement is failing to do?
Bill Mitchell, Dr. Bill Mitchell, what do you think? Evening.
Oh, hello there. It's been really, really fascinating listening to the discussion. So I think from the position from BCS, which is the Chartered Institute for IT, I think we're pretty clear that there is a consensus that social media just can't be an anonymous playground for racism, homophobia, hate speech, sexism, misogynist, death threats. That can't happen anymore. When we surveyed our professional members, 64% of them said they definitely want Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms to be asking for Real ID. At the same time, 76% of them said, actually, you should have the right to anonymity because we do want to protect people from vulnerable sections of society so that they can openly discuss issues that are really sensitive and that we do not want them to be persecuted because of their views. And the way you introduce the right kind of checks and balances is that you make it really, really easy for somebody to just go, I'm going to block anybody that does not want to be identified. So I'm going to block everybody that chooses to be anonymous if I want to, but whenever I choose to, I can go back into that bigger, wider debate and take the risks there are of listening to people who may turn out to be trolls. And when we talk to our members, half of them, so this is interesting, so half of them said, actually, this isn't something you want governments to have to impose. You want them to set the right regulatory framework, but it should be the social media companies that have to actually remove online abuse to make sure it doesn't happen. So there was quite a nuanced, balanced view there. Yes, we want anonymity sometimes, but actually, when push comes to shove, when you're dealing with homophobic behaviour, hate speech, racism, actually that person should be accountable for what they are doing. There is a balance between individual freedoms and the public good. And we have to make sure that the social media companies behave ethically and responsibly, and we have the right checks and balances in place to make it happen.
And these companies will position themselves, Dr. Bill, as ethical, won't they? Is there any doubt that they have the technological ability to very quickly identify racist or homophobic abuse and take it offline? Is there any doubt about that?
Right, so this is the spectrum, okay? So when it's really extreme and obvious, yes, they can. And actually, they do a lot
so why don't they?
Well, I think when it's very extreme and obvious, they can do. But when it starts to get a bit subtle and a bit in the grey area, that's where it's actually quite hard, and where you actually see examples where they've taken down stuff that in fact was legitimate debate. This is why I think our members have said, do you know what? It should be the case that people don't have the option to be anonymous, or rather that we should make sure that we can identify people when we need to.
Let me give you, and I have many examples, right? But let me give you a real life example of something that happened to me, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. I lose track of time, right? Because you're saying if they're really, really obvious, they take them down. No, they don't. And I've personal experience of that. So here's an example. So as part of my job, I'm a pretty ordinary guy. I happen to work in radio and telly. Okay, so I have a television show in Northern Ireland. And what happened to me a number of years ago, 3-4 years ago, is I was presenting a live television show in a BBC studio. And for whatever reason, I had my shirt off, okay? On the set, on the BBC set, on this live show. Someone took a 1-second still frame of that television show, manipulated the image and suggested that was me in California with a male prostitute. All right? That image and that accusation was then repeated thousands of times. When I contacted both Twitter and Facebook, they wrote back to me and told me that neither the image nor the accusation broke their community guidelines. And but for the fact that I happen to have a little bit of money where I could, use expensive lawyers to tell them where to put their message, that it did not break community guidelines, I would have been completely helpless.
But I think that's interesting, actually, because what you're saying there is that companies have their own policies which they choose to implement. And who says whether those are the right policies or not? It's basically the companies that choose to say that. That's one of the reasons I think why it's helpful to have the right kind of regulatory framework that those companies are then obliged to work with.
But my point to you was, it was the vast majority of people doing it, say on me, they're all anonymous trolls. So they had no jeopardy. They had no danger. They were getting a kick out of this.
Now, it's worth mentioning that the solution we heard from your earlier guest from the FA was that we need to arrest and fine and jail executives from tech companies. Well, I can tell you that the direction we're going in is exactly that, is that we would have the employees of companies where these things unfortunately happen to appear being subjected to criminal fines and incarceration, but the actual people who are committing the offenses would walk off scot-free. Now, I'd ask you, what motivation are any of these companies going to have to take these issues seriously if they are going to be the ones who are literally arrested and incarcerated when the actual trolls will walk away scot-free because law enforcement and the police are not enforcing the laws that are already in place?
Well, Heather, you have been wanting tonight to defend people's right to harmful but legal speech.
Absolutely not. That's absolutely untrue. I am defending the right to speak anonymously and to be able to express opinions without having to register a government form of ID on the assumption that you are guilty before proven innocent. And all of us should have that right.
And I would agree with that, but I would also say that actually we should all have the right to not be exposed to hate speech coming from people who don't choose to identify themselves, so that we should have a balance between I can choose to only listen to people who have identified themselves so that we know who they are, and I can choose to be anonymous and engage with us for the people who haven't decided that they want to.
And you should have that right, but you should not have the right to take that liberty away from me.
03030, sorry, 08085 909 693. You'd remember the number of the station, don't I? Richard in London. Hello, Richard.
Hi there, Stephen.
You know the number, mate. You're through to us. Go ahead. What do you think?
So hopefully I can offer a different angle to this issue. Not that I disagree with the others who've contributed to tonight. So right now I'm doing a PhD into how people use social media and how they communicate with each other on social media, specifically their behaviour and their communication skills online. What I found from my research and that of many others is that whilst most people know the impact of their words and actions when they're face-to-face with others, that doesn't necessarily translate exactly when they're online. So many don't really understand or realise the emotional impact and damage that they cause when they communicate, for example, racist abuse online. They don't understand that. It's something that...
Well, I don't get that. So how do they not understand?
A bit more. So, well, you know, you might say that, well, many people get taunted, trolled, as they say, and they just ignore it. They block people, and people have the strength of mind to deal with that, and that's great. Those people can do that. But several studies have shown that the emotional impact of being publicly humiliated and insulted and being, you know, racially abused online has the same psychological impact as if that person was doing that to them face to face. So
no, sorry, I get that, Richard. The bit if I misunderstood you, I'm sorry. I thought you were saying the trolls don't understand the hurt that they're causing. I thought that's what you were saying.
I'm saying that a wider proportion of people who do these things. For example, some people have met up face-to-face with people that were abusing them, and in almost every case, there was a journalist who set up meetings with people that abused him, and in every case, the person was completely different when they were face-to-face. And that's what I'm seeing in my research, was that people behave differently online. Now, that's not to say that we just let people off and we don't, you know, I agree that we need to include banning as part of the mix of solving the problem, but we also need to look at the cause of these issues. And I think what it is that, you know, we need a wider discussion about, like, how we should conduct ourselves online, especially when it comes to emotions, impulsivity, posting whilst under the influence of drugs or alcohol, for example. I think a lot of people think that that those that are posting these racist comments are just sober, rational people. Well, maybe they're not. And maybe they, just like they didn't read the terms and conditions, just like they didn't read the terms and conditions for when they signed up to an app, they didn't read the community guidelines either. And that's what I found in my research. Even with people that are, you know, college, you know, very intelligent people, all the way down to, you know, across all demographics. So I think if we actually started to look a little bit about that and try and kind of like we say, don't drink and drive, like don't drink and tweet. If you're upset that your team lost, because maybe a foreign player made a mistake, you know, and help people learn to apply the brake.
I think, Richard, as in, you know, most things in life, they're all different. There's a whole spread of different categories of offender here. So there may indeed be, Richard, those people who send one offensive message when drunk, or angry or they've lost it, all right? And I hear you. But there are quite a few people for whom this is a sport, for whom this is actually part of their vacuous life. That what they do is they profile people, they target them, and this is what they do in their free time. They try to destroy people.
You just said it there, their vacuous life, right? What's going on in that vacuous life? Is it mental health problems? Is it loneliness? Is it isolation? Is it trying to have a kind of, trying to make a show and show how impactful they are because they've created this fuss? And again, it's about realizing that, I think you said it yourself, that people, there's a mix of motivations and reasons about why people do these things. And I think if we understood that better and talked about that, rather than this blanket idea that it's just one or two, maybe two kinds of people with one or two motivations doing these things, because then you're not really giving the opportunity of redemption and solving the problem. Because that is essentially what we want to do. We want to reduce harm on the victims.
Well,
and we do that not just by banning people, but at the same time, which I agree with, but at the same time educating them and trying to get them to understand just how strong an impact they have, because I don't think they realise, not from my research.
Well, look, you're the guy doing the research. My anecdotal experience, Richard, and Mohammed, I don't know how you feel about this, but my anecdotal experience, Richard, is they know exactly what they're attempting to do. They know exactly what type of destruction they're attempting to seek, and they're clearly getting off on it.
Not from any of my research. It's quite the opposite that I found.
So you're saying these people? So you're saying these people are racially abusing people, or threatening to put a bullet in the head of some people, or demeaning someone and taking part in a pile-on, and they're grown adults and they don't realise that is harassing someone?
Well, that's a generalisation just to say they're grown adults. I'm saying that these grown adults, we need to split them into different categories of people and realise that there are solutions for the different groups of people that are doing these things. And banning some of them just won't work. Campaigning and having campaigns won't work. It won't stop them. But maybe some other form, which I'm trying to figure out myself through the PhD with my recommendations at the end, what is the solution. But at the moment, I feel like we're just coming with a bit of a blunt hammer to this, instead of realising that, like I said, when people have come face to face with their trolls, and these people, these grown adults, they should know better, they always back down. Almost always back down and apologise.
Well, I get abuse pretty much every day. I get racist abuse. I get called all sort of names. I get told to get out of the country, go back to where you come from, even though I'm from Rochdale. I get abused, and I don't see any justification for that. I feel as if social media companies, have profited from that. And I don't know how many people you're speaking to, but the people that abuse me on a daily basis, my friend, have no capacity to apologise, and they know full well what they are doing. They're harassing people to the point where...
How do you know that? How do you know that, though? Have you talked to them?
Based on the fact that they continuously do it. They continuously do it to
but
public
have you
figures.
talked to them?
Well, I don't need to talk to them. Well, if somebody calls you
I think you should.
Let me finish.
I have spoken to those people.
Okay, let me...
It's not as clear
buddy. We can't have a conversation if you're not going to listen to me. Because mine is based on life experience. I don't know what your ethnic background is.
You're just one person?
It might not matter to you, but it does matter to me. And I'm not one person. There are millions of people, thousands of people on social media who get that abuse subjected to them on a daily basis. And we get football players who get called all sorts of names. Black players being called monkeys and all sorts of things. And so I just don't think the idea that yes, if somebody wants to take responsibility and apologise and mend their ways, absolutely, I'm for redemption. We could, but what isn't acceptable if it's for social media companies to just sit back and watch it happen, because at the back of that, they make profit from it.
Okay. Richard, do you get much abuse online?
I had a moment where I put up a crowdfund and it became very popular and I was in the media and I got bombarded with thousands, literally thousands. I was in the Daily Mail being slaughtered, basically, and even, just the radio stations yours. And I was, because I'm studying this topic, I was able to kind of not pay attention to that and just pay attention to the positive messages that were coming in, something that I was doing. Because I was helping from a foreign country, and I was working around the corner before Brexit. So
I've got to leave it there, mate. But thank you very much indeed. Really interesting research that you're doing. Really interesting conversation. It is from Monday illegal for Australian citizens to return home from India. All direct flights from the subcontinent have been stopped in a bid to cut COVID-19 cases in the country's hotel quarantine system. Let's speak to Dan Bourchier from the ABC News team in the capital, Canberra. How many people have been will be affected by this, Dan?
Stephen, good morning. At this stage, it's considered that this could apply to many, many thousands of Australians who are still stuck in India, who have been trying to get home over the recent months, but in particular, of course, in the last couple of weeks. But if you expand that out to those people that might have been wanting to come to Australia, that number could balloon right out. And I guess that's one of the key questions here is the proportionality of this. And we've heard from doctors this morning saying that this move, this unprecedented move, that this part of the Biosecurity Act has never been used before, is, quote, incredibly disproportionate to the threat that is posed. That was Dr. Vyom Sharma, a Melbourne GP and health commentator, who says that this goes well and above what's required to protect Australia from any threat.
Has there been any testing of the legality around this? Is this effectively the Australian government tampering with someone's citizenship?
Well, I think it's going to be a very interesting question. And as you'd be aware, Stephen, the details of this have been emerging this morning. So it is surprising in that aspect. But when it comes to the legality, I suspect there are going to be challenges to this. Now, I mentioned that this is powers that are under the Biosecurity Act to stop those people coming into the country. My understanding at this stage is that this advice to the government came from the Chief Medical Officer. And so you'd have to think that there was some aspect of considering the legal ramifications. Mind you, this is in place for 2 weeks from today until the 15th, and then there'll be another review then. But this is not going to be one that is accepted lightly, I suspect.
And the bottom line is too many positive cases are coming back from India.
And not only too many positive cases, but it's really shown some of the weaknesses in the programs in Australia that were already in place around hotel quarantining, which, as you'd be aware, has been a big issue and has been one that is incredibly contentious between the states and territories and the Commonwealth government here around who has control and where those powers sit. But in addition to this, in just the last couple of days, we had Australian cricketers, the stars Kane Richardson and Adam Zampa. They had been in India. That initial travel ban came in, that if you came back to Australia, you had to quarantine with all sorts of rules attached. Well, they managed to come back through Doha, avoiding that. So that was stamped on pretty quickly by the government when that emerged on social media and across media platforms. But this has been, the sense that I get about this, Stephen, is that the government is trying to avoid another situation where people are coming into the country potentially with this new strain or this developed strain of COVID-19 and are worried about the impact that will have on the discussions that are happening here. Mind you, Australia's ambassador to the United States, Arthur Sinodinos, has spoken in the last couple of hours, and he's indicating that Australia might not open borders for some time, potentially years, until, quote, the whole world is vaccinated.
My goodness. So keeping borders closed for years? That is an astonishing statement, isn't it?
It is shocking. I don't think there's any other way to explain it. When you hear that coming from a top official saying that Australia will potentially be closed for years and years until the entire world is vaccinated. Of course, you'd be aware there's been some discussion about this. It's ebbing and flowing as it is there in the United Kingdom as well. But such a comment by someone so senior in such a public way, this wasn't a leaked commentary from what I'm aware of. This was an online event at the Washington DC-based Hudson Institute, saying that it was an economic imperative, but unlikely to happen soon. Like, this is going to be huge for the way that Australia sits in the global picture.
Dan, thank you very much indeed for your reporting tonight. Thank you. Our last call of the night comes from Michelle in Lincolnshire. I can only give you 2 minutes, Michelle. Evening to you.
Good morning, Stephen. With regards to that Richard that's just been on, the solution is to shut down their account, prosecute them. Then maybe you can talk to them as you would somebody in prison and find out why they do what they do. But that's not why I'm calling. Why I'm calling, Stephen, and I'm trying not to cry because I'm a Cambridge United supporter, and you'll know what our result was last night. That's just tongue-in-cheek. My point for calling you, Stephen, with regard to the 4-day lockdown, I fear it won't be sufficient and it won't work. Simply because the social media companies couldn't care less, probably. The real way to hurt them is for hundreds, if not thousands of people to shut down their accounts and hit them financially. Then they will take notice, one hopes.
Michelle, thank you. Your last call of the night. Thank you very much indeed. Mohammed, thank you as always, sir.
Thank you.
For calling us, for being on the radio with us, should I say.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for calling us tonight, for listening to The Nolan Show tonight. We're back tomorrow night, so enjoy your Saturday in between. And thank you very much indeed. See you tomorrow night. Night-night.
The voice of the UK. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at 1 o'clock. This is Nick Qureshi. Care home residents in England will be allowed to go out for low-risk visits without having to self-isolate for 2 weeks on their return. The government has updated its guidance following the success of the vaccination campaign and falling COVID infection rates. Campaigners had threatened legal action, calling the current restrictions barbaric. Funerals have been taking place in Israel after 45 people died in a crush at a crowded Jewish festival. Around 150 were injured near Mount Meron, where people became trapped in an overcrowded passageway. Rabbi Motti Seligson had family there.
One of the people who were there was my cousin, and our family couldn't get a hold of him. The phone lines seemed to be jamming up. Meron's a town with a population of only 1,000. They had 100,000 people there last night. And finally, after several hours, to much relief, we were able to get in touch with him, and thank God he was okay.
The actor and screenwriter Noel Clarke has said he is deeply sorry for some of his actions and will seek professional help. He's again vehemently denied sexual misconduct after 20 women accused him of harassment and bullying. Double the number of migrants reached the UK by boat from January to April than in the same period in 2020. 109 people arrived on Friday, bringing the total this year to well over 2,000. The Home Office has promised to make the cross-channel route unviable. UK clubbers have returned to the dance floor for the first time since the pandemic began. A warehouse in Liverpool is staging an event where thousands of ticket holders don't need to socially distance or wear face coverings, but must test negative for COVID before they're let in. Professor Paul Monks is involved in the government's events research programme.
This is an experiment. We know all the names. Everybody's consented. We can test and trace these individuals and suggest isolation if there are any things. So this is a much more controlled environment in some senses in knowing what the demographic is, the people who are there, in order again to minimise that sort of risk.
The studies found the Brazilian part of the Amazon released 20% more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in the past decade than it absorbed. Large-scale logging and deliberately lit forest fires are being blamed. Steve Jackson reports.
The authors of the study, published in the journal Nature Climate Change, say this is the first time it's been possible to show that the Brazilian Amazon is now a net emitter of greenhouse gases. The Amazon is the world's biggest tropical rainforest and has always played a key role in absorbing carbon dioxide. 60% of the forest lies in Brazil, so taken as a whole, the report says the Amazon is now only carbon neutral. Deforestation of the Amazon, mostly to clear land for farming, has been going on for decades, but campaigners say President Bolsonaro's policies have accelerated the process.
And NASA is to extend its Mars helicopter mission. Ingenuity will help the Perseverance rover search for signs of life. BBC News, it's 3 minutes past 1.
Across BBC Local Radio and BBC Radio 5 Live, Jim Davis.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, good morning. It's just after 1 o'clock now on this Saturday, the 1st of May. Welcome to a brand new month. It's the years this year. Flying by. I hope you're well this morning. Thank you for tuning our way. We're live across BBC Local Radio, BBC Radio Ulster, BBC Radio Wales and BBC Radio Scotland, and across the UK on BBC Radio 5 Live. I'm with you right the way through now until 5 a.m. Our lights are on and our lines are open. We are live through the night once again, and it's good to have your company. So if you'd like to come and join in the conversation, then consider yourself openly invited, a gold embossed invitation, if you will, to come and join me on the air at any time. Here's the phone number that you need for this programme. It's a slightly different one to perhaps the one you're used to wherever you're listening in this morning, but let me give it to you now so you can make a note. It's 0800 731 2000. That's 0800 731 2000. Those lines are open right now, and Anne-Marie and Belinda are through the glass ready to take your call if you'd like to come and join me on the air this morning. You can text into the programme. 81333 is the text number for this show. Texts are charged at your standard network rate. Please start your message with the letters UK, otherwise it doesn't come through to me. And you can email me as well, of course. That's simply jim@bbc.co.uk. So that's how to reach me. What are we going to talk about? Well, it's one of those nights where there's a heck of a lot that we could discuss. And as always, I'm open to what's on your mind, particularly with regard to coronavirus tonight. We'll talk about the fact that there's been this big clubbing event going on in Liverpool as a test to understand about the testing regimes around these kinds of events. What are they going to learn from that? And I wonder whether or not you approve of these events at this stage of the game. The infection rates in the UK have fallen back to levels we saw now at the end of last summer. And if you can remember that graph, it was the sort of the bottom of the roller coaster ride before we started to climb back up again in terms of the second wave. So are you worried perhaps that we might be setting ourselves up for even a third wave potentially then at that rate if we are in any way lax or complacent about this virus, which we know to be able to get a grip back in society relatively easily. Having said that, of course, vaccination levels continue to increase and that will help. But I'm just interested in terms of your perspective on COVID tonight. There's the clubbing story, there's the infection rate story. Also tonight there's been confirmation that care home residents will be able to leave their home for low-risk trips without having to self-isolate for 14 days on return. That's from the government tonight. So those rules will be relaxed in England from Tuesday, allowing for walks or garden visits without self-isolation. That's going to be, I would imagine, a relative game changer for you if you have a loved one in a care home or care facility at the moment and you've been starved of contact. You're welcome to react to that as well tonight as we discuss all things coronavirus. We have an open forum on this programme, as I'm sure you know by now, and you can call with any thoughts you may have about those stories. We'll delve into them in a bit more detail in a moment. There's this big social media blackout going on at the moment in terms of the sporting world. The Duke of Cambridge as well has said tonight that he's joining the entire football community in this weekend's social media boycott. The idea behind this 4-day blackout by the world of sport on their social media channels with many players and clubs as well as broadcasters all joining in, is to say basically online abuse is not acceptable. It's as simple as that, and of course it's often very high profile people, particularly in the sporting world, that are on the receiving end of this kind of abuse, often racially based, but also other forms of abuse as well. Tonight, the Duke of Cambridge, in a post on the Kensington Royal account, has said, as president of the FA, I join the entire football community in the social media boycott. In January, William hit out at racist abuse in football again, describing it as despicable and saying it must stop. So we can talk about the responsibility here and who has that responsibility for cleaning up social media. I'm interested to hear from you if you've been on the receiving end of this kind of abusive torment. They're called trolls, the people that send these sorts of messages. And who do you think has that responsibility? Where does it lie? Is it with government? Is it with social media? Is it with the individuals themselves? Is it with society? Is it amongst us that we should be doing more to call it out when we see this kind of abuse? We'll talk about that this morning. On the slightly lighter side, I mean, obviously the ongoing scenario around Boris Johnson and the accountability that he's being called to with regard to various aspects of the refurbishment of the flat and so on at Downing Street and other aspects of the lobbying situation. As part of that story, it's quite interesting to know, because part of this was all based, you remember, around texts between Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and Sir James Dyson, the inventor, and the access, it was alleged that Sir James Dyson has to the Prime Minister to effectively lobby him directly. It seems that Boris Johnson's mobile phone number has been freely available on the internet now for, at least the last 15 years, according to reports. If you knew where to look, a contact number for Mr. Johnson was listed at the bottom of a press release, which was still available online in 2021, and it's the same number that he's been using ever since, apparently. Do you know what I would like to ask you? If you had Boris Johnson's mobile phone number, what would you say to him? What would you call and say to the Prime Minister if you could ring him up right now? Call me, tell me, and who knows? You never know, he may be listening. 0800 731 2000. What would you say if you had Boris Johnson's mobile phone? And finally, this morning, I'd like to ask you, apropos of nothing really, I was just talking about this with friends this week, and I thought, well, I'll ask that question on the programme this morning. Do you still keep a diary? It feels like quite an old-fashioned question, this, but writing a diary before going to bed is an age-old tradition, isn't it? It could actually have some real-life benefits, and I'll share those with you in just a moment. But it is something of a lost art, I think, diarising your life. So I'm wondering if you still keep a diary. Do you have old diaries from your younger years, and do you ever read them? And maybe you have diaries that were left to you by loved ones and family, and I wonder if you've ever read back over those and treasure them. So we'll talk about the old-fashioned diary this morning. Not an events diary, not a planning diary per se. I think most of us keep some form of documentation, either paper and pen or online now, to organise our future lives. I'm talking about reflecting on your day and reflecting on your week, and actually keeping record of that. 0800 731 2000. So that's what we're going to talk about broadly this morning. The lines are open now, and Anne-Marie and Belinda are through the glass taking your calls. We'll get you through to me as quickly as possible and get you on the air. Let's start with this clubbing story. I'm a retired clubber, I would describe myself now as, but I must admit even I was a little bit jealous tonight of the several thousand people that have returned to the dance floor for the first time since the pandemic begun tonight as part of trials to see how venues can reopen. 3,000 people, to be precise, attended the first of two events at a venue in Liverpool. And of course, as part of this experiment, they weren't required to socially distance. They weren't required to wear face coverings. What they did need, however, was a negative COVID test before being allowed in. These people were at the event tonight.
It feels like coming back to normality, finally. The freedom is coming back. Finally, after so long being in lockdown and not doing anything, we have a little bit of normality.
I think it's a very smart way, like, to bringing back the old parties. Like, not like without any responsibility, but with the test before, test after, and all of that.
Well, it's all designed to understand how these events can work in a post-COVID world. Professor Paul Monks is the scientific advisor to the Events Research Programme.
There's three different types of science that we're doing around this event. The use and applicability of testing, which we've already talked about, the airflow and ventilation and the environment, and trying to understand the risk in a more quantifiable way through that. And also we've got a number of behavioural scientists looking at the mixing and the sort of social interactions that go on at a range of events. And don't forget, we're not only using nightclubs, we're doing everything from theatre settings and the snooker at the Crucible. We've done football events, and we're going to be doing outdoor running events. And what we're trying to do with that group of events is try to put together a picture so we understand the risk of these events, and the science can help us make better decisions around that.
What do you make of this tonight? How do you feel seeing the images of 3,000 young people together in a nightclub environment enjoying themselves? As I said, a little bit of me was slightly jealous, actually. Although I haven't really been clubbing per se for many, many years, I have to say being denied the opportunity to go if I wanted to was enough to make me think, oh gosh, look at them having so much fun. But at the same time, you may also share the concerns that were expressed by some tonight that actually it's perhaps too soon to be doing something like this. And actually, if there were to be COVID positive people amongst them who'd slipped through the net on testing and could be then spreading it amongst these young people who might not themselves be affected by it, but might then take it home to family and loved ones and work colleagues and others who haven't consented to go along to this kind of event, then you may think actually it's way too soon to be doing this sort of experiment. And that's what it is. It's an experiment. 0800 731 2000 to react to that story tonight. It does come as coronavirus infections in the UK fall back to levels seen at the end of last summer. So that's around 1 in 1,000 people thought to have the virus. That's according to the Office for National Statistics data. So in the week to the 24th of April, infections fell in all 4 nations in the UK and were 20 times lower than they were in January. And of course, more than half of the UK population has now received a first vaccine jab as well, me included. I had mine on Monday of this week, and I'm very happy to say that apart from a little bit of a woozy head on Tuesday evening, I felt perfectly fine throughout. It's also been confirmed tonight that care home residents will be able to leave their home for low-risk trips without having to self-isolate for 14 days afterwards. The rules are being relaxed in England from Tuesday to allow for walks in the garden and garden visits without self-isolation. The government says that a fall in COVID cases means that it's much safer now for care home residents to go outside. And the charity John's Campaign says that this is a chink of light, at least for residents and their families. If you'd like to react to that tonight and let me know what it's been like for you and your loved one in a care facility, being denied and starved of that contact. Does this offer you a crumb of comfort to know that you will be able to see one another? And hopefully now, and I know the weather over this bank holiday is set to be pretty rubbish, but with the summer approaching, it might be at least a little bit of a comfort to know that hopefully you'll be able to take a trip out with your loved one who's been in that care facility all of this time. 0800 731 2000 is the number. So there we have the programme tonight. The Duke of Cambridge, of course, adding his voice to the entire football community about social media and the blackout there to stamp out online abuse. Who do you feel is responsible for cleaning up social media? Or do you feel this is just symptomatic of something far more deep-rooted, particularly in terms of racism, but other forms of abuse like homophobia and other types of online trolling that might rear its ugly head in the form of a tweet or a post on TikTok or something, or a comment on an online article? It's, I suppose, endemic in society, you might argue, that this kind of negativity is expressed in many ways, and actually you could argue that it's just free speech. It might be distasteful, it might be subjective, it might be hurtful, but is it wrong? And if so, who's responsible for stopping it? 0800 731 2000. And as I said, if you had Boris Johnson's mobile phone number, which apparently has been freely available on the internet for the last 15 odd years, what would you say to him? If you could give the Prime Minister a call, what would you say? And finally, do you still keep a diary? And we'll go into the reasons why it could actually have real life benefits during the course of the programme. But let's get to your calls this morning. We're going to start in Leicester, and Mark is there to get the ball rolling for us. Hello, Mark. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Jim. Morning, mate. You all right?
Yeah, I'm very well. Good to hear from you. Go ahead. What would you like to tell me?
Yeah, about obviously the COVID situation and the thing with the nightclub tonight in Liverpool.
Yeah.
Mixed feelings about that, to be honest with you. Just that we've had obviously an odd lockdown, up until February, March time. Then things have eased, obviously, from April time with shops opening and haircuts and all this thing, which is great, what we've been through. But, I've lost 2 people through this, and they've worked hard and tried to stay safe as best they could. One was a driver 36 years of age and one was a bit older. And, they lost their life through this, and no fault of their own. Terrible, terrible disease. We've all had grievances, a lot of people through this, or not been able to mix, and lives have been shattered. But I just think it's just a bit too soon. I mean, okay, youngsters, this trial thing to enjoy themselves and do whatever, but I'm just not sure about it. I don't know whether you are, Jim. But
it's interesting because it comes, as I've described, in terms of the level of infection within the population. We're at a very low point right now, about 1 in 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And if you take 3,000 people that are in that club, then at worst, there should be maybe 3 or 4 people in there that might have COVID. But of course, they've all had a negative test as well, so hopefully that will have even wheedled those out. So the risk factor is very, very low, according to those who've organised tonight's events. It's a very controlled environment. They know everybody who's been there. They've all consented to being there, and they will all be contacted afterwards and be offered a test to see whether or not they've contracted anything in the process. So it is an incredibly controlled environment. So I suppose my question, given your reservations, Mark, is when should we start to do these things in terms of trying to re-establish our lives? Because we can't go on wringing our hands and waiting for the virus to go away, because as we know, it's very unlikely to be going away anytime soon.
No, I just think 150,000 people, whatever, is dead in this country. I think we've got to come out of it. It's dropped down. The vaccine's a great thing. It's going to take a long time. But you've got probably 20-25% of the country vaccinated. The rest of the people haven't.
No, it's 50% of all adults at the moment have received. More than half of the population now have received the first jab.
Yeah, the first jab, but not obviously the second jab. So that's the bulletproof sort of thing. You've got the Indian variant sort of in the country at the minute. It's been picked up in London and places, which is scary if that transmits. We're not saying that at the minute. Going back to the point what we said, I think it's great that we're eating stuff and we're trying to get back to normality. I'm for that because we've all been through hell. But going to the testing, the PCR tests are only 6% right?
No, I think they.
Sorry, the flow test.
Yeah, the lateral flow test.
Test. Yeah. Now, where my partner works, she's a carer. Lots of people have had a flow test where they're absolutely fine, and then they go to the PCR test, and you've probably got 10 or 15 people have been tested positive. Now, at that nightclub tonight, they're only doing PCR tests, not actual.
Prior to the event, they had lateral flow tests, I believe, supervised lateral flow tests, and then after the event, they'll have the PCR tests. So,
but it will be interesting. If they do I'm not sure what the procedure is.
PCR test,
if they do a PCR test after, and there's loads positive, if that transpires, they've all mixed tonight, great. When they set that home, and it expires, and it goes through to the family, where are we going to lead to then? Are the government going to come on and say, this has gone wrong?
Well, I must admit, I did hear a caller to Stephen Nolan's programme on 5 Live before I came on the air tonight, expressing expressing huge dismay that Liverpool is effectively being used as a guinea pig city for these events. Again, there's 2 schools of thought there. You could say, well, actually, that's outrageous that we haven't been asked or given sort of consent for this sort of thing to happen? Because all of these individuals are now going to suddenly emerge from this event and start walking around town, what have you. You could also ask or suggest that it's a huge honour to be asked to find the gateway out of coronavirus in this sense. But at what cost? Mark, I think you raised some really good points. Thank you for getting the ball rolling this morning. 0800 731 2000 is the number then. Mixed feelings from Mark. What are your thoughts? It's 1:22. Let's go to Margaret now, who's in Goole in East Yorkshire. Hello, Margaret. Good morning to you.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hello.
How are you this morning?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
Yes,
Thanks
thank you.
for calling. Go ahead. What would you like to tell me?
I've kept a diary since 1958.
Oh, lovely.
And I've got almost all of them.
Okay, so there's a few missing.
Yes, I think, I've moved about 22 times.
Wow.
And there's just been odd ones that maybe, for instance, there was one in the 1960s when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
In the back of the diary, I'd put symbols, and I can't remember what they meant now. But I think that was one of the ones I thought I would maybe get rid of. I would dispose of that one.
Okay.
But no, I've had a sort of a life full of ups and downs, been widowed twice. And there's been various ups and downs, and when I look back I remember thinking how awful it was at the time. But you look back maybe after say 5-10 years and you think, yeah, I came through that, and in a way I found it quite helpful getting through the bad times when you look back and you look at the emotions at the time.
So you do actually physically reopen those diaries and read your words from
every now and again if I'm sorting out where I keep them, and every now and again I think, I'd better dust in there. And then I can't put them back without looking. I've got to sneak in one or two. And when my son was 50, I thought, I'll give him the diary where I'd written in, when I was expecting him and how much we were looking forward to having him and all of that. And then I forgot when he was 50, a lot of things were happening round about then, and I never got round to getting it out, so I might give him it when he's 51.
Okay, why not? That's a lovely thought.
Yeah.
So when you're settling in of a night time then to fill out that blank page, I mean you're quite used to it now obviously, but how do you set about diarising your day?
I just write down like today I heard that a cousin of mine had died, and I mean I'll write that in, and if I've been going to somewhere unpleasant like the dentist, I'll write that in, and then I've often put it wasn't as bad as I expected. So then when I have to go again, maybe say I had to have a fill-in a few years, maybe a bit further down the line, I think, oh yeah, I remember. And I look back and I think, yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought.
So I'm intrigued by the fact that you don't just log the factual events of the day, but also how you felt about them.
I write how I feel. It's probably more about emotion and how I feel. I know my ex-daughter-in-law said she couldn't wait to read my diaries. Anyway, she's divorced now from my son, so she'll never get to see them. But she was always saying, I would love to read your diaries. And I thought, well, no, maybe you wouldn't, because there's odd bits in where, she wasn't very good with the grandchildren at times, and I've probably put something like that in my diary.
But this is the thing, isn't it? Because they are intensely private in that sense.
Yes.
They're your innermost thoughts you're expressing to a blank page. So apropos of nobody ever reading it, other than perhaps yourself.
I think I'm the only one that's ever read them. I know there was one or two. The first one, when in 1958, I was only 13. And I thought, everything was boring. I went to school and I came home, and then round about then I remember polythene, like plastic washing up bowls were all the thing. They were starting to come in different colours. And I'd written in the diary the most boring entry ever. We got a new plastic washing up bowl.
Oh, how wonderful that is. See, you say that's boring, but that's just joyful to me. And I have to admit, Margaret, I am slightly jealous because I was about 13 when I started writing a diary, but I was demotivated to continue because over the years, when I was at my most hormone-ridden, angst-ridden, pubescent self, a total nightmare, all I ever sort of spewed out onto the page was complete nonsense about how rubbish my life was, and after a couple of years of doing it, I was thinking, this is such a negative experience, I'm going to stop doing it. I haven't done it since.
Look back now and you probably think, I remember how fed up I was, or how you thought when you look back, like the first time, the very first romance, when that breaks up, you think the world has ended, and you look back and you think, I fell in love more than once, and it's sort of all part of life. And one of the earlier entries, my dad was widowed when he was in his 40s. We lost our mum very young, and my dad met somebody we called Auntie Elsie, and I've put one day, Dad and Auntie Elsie had a big row. They fell out, and then the next day I'd written in the diary, Dad and Auntie Elsie fell in again. And it was full of silly little things like that. But one of the things that quite shocked me, actually, was I'd written when I was 13 in this diary for 1958, my new doll was born on Christmas Day. I mean, 13, and I'd got a doll. I was, when I think the average 13-year-old girl now, she would be into makeup and all stuff like that.
Yeah, times have changed.
That is sort of something, there's quite a lot of social change over the years. It's almost like a little bit of history in a way.
It really is. It really is. Honestly, Margaret, that's a joy to talk to you this morning. Thank you. You keep those diaries so very safe.
Keep on. I'm 76 this year, so it will end eventually. And somebody no doubt will. I mean, they might just get dumped. Nobody might. I think curiosity. Somebody, maybe my teenage granddaughter, maybe would be tempted to look.
Yeah, I hope so.
You never know.
I hope so.
Look.
Lovely to talk to you, Margaret. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye for now. 0800 731 2000. The reason, apparently, diarising in this way can be good is it actually has real, in terms of mental health, benefits, in terms of listing all the things you've done that day can give you a sense of satisfaction and relaxation. Actually, to physically see, oh my God, actually I did achieve quite a lot today, once you sort of physically write it all out. It can help you plan ahead too. If you can add into your diary, the NHS suggests writing a to-do list at the end of the day, help you organise your thoughts before bed. It'll help you clear your mind of any distractions as well, and give you peace of mind that you won't forget something important overnight. Often people worry about that, don't they? They think of something before bed and think, oh crumbs, I've got to remember to send that birthday card or something, and then forget about it. If you put it down on the page before you go to bed, it reinforces that thought. So diarising your life in that way as well can actually have a real benefit. Do you still keep a diary? 0800 731 2000. Ben's in Cheltenham next. Hello, Ben. Good morning.
Hello, Jim. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Hello there. I want to talk about diaries as well.
Sure.
My granddad, unfortunately, he passed away on Christmas Day in 2007, but we kept all of his old diaries, and there was this one time when I was looking in it a couple of years ago, and my auntie was born on April Fool's Day.
Yeah, right.
And she had a dog, and he wrote in the diary, and it made me laugh, that the dog ate her birthday cake on her birthday.
See, little moments like that, Ben, we're likely to forget, aren't we? Unless we share them time and time again as part of our family's history, those moments will be lost in the annals of time. Because it's actually diarised and written down, you can recall that much more vividly, can't you?
Yeah, lovely. Because I love writing diaries as well. Like in my diary, I write like what happened today, or like when is it someone's birthday and who I've spoken to on the phone. And I also even like in like when our rubbish bin's being collected, and if it's a bank holiday, to remember to put it out on a different day, and then you think, yeah, I got to do that. And I love writing in the diary.
That's lovely.
I love my diary, yeah.
What sort of diary do you keep then? Is it a very formal-looking diary, like one you'd buy from a newsagent or something, or is it a bit more lavish?
Look, like when I buy from a newsagent, and I think, today's Monday the 1st, or something like that, and I'm like, oh, yeah, put that in there, and all of my appointments, and what... and I absolutely love it, and sometimes I even draw my pictures in there, what I've done as well. I like to draw.
Oh, do you? That's interesting.
Yeah.
So, what, just doodling, or are the drawings significant for any reason? Do they represent something?
Like some of the drawings are like what represent like what represents like a couple of years ago, back in 2012.
Yeah.
I got my diary shows of me, I did a photo of me moving into my new flat when I first got my new flat.
Yeah.
And when I first moved out of my dad's house, and I brought a picture of the house and some me carrying some boxes.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, look, keep it up, Ben, because clearly, as Margaret was expressing, because she's a few years down the road from us, that it has great value, and she looks back on this with huge fondness. Lovely to talk to you, Ben. Thank you for your call this morning. Do you still keep a diary? 0800 731 2000. Right, Richard on text this morning says, what would I say to Boris Johnson if I had his mobile phone number? In the spirit of you can't make everyone happy all the time, I'd say, good morning, Mr. B. Never forget that even Bagpuss, when he's asleep, is just a saggy old cloth cat. I'm a little tired and worn at the seams as well, but Emily loves him. Because we're all only human. Well, you did ask, says Richard. This text says, Jim, it's not signed. I'm glad you've highlighted the point that those attending the club event tonight took tests prior, but honestly, I think it's too soon. If we did go into a third lockdown, says this texter. And Brian in Wales says about the clubbing event in Liverpool tonight, it is better to have 3,000 legal people attending an organised event than 1,000 or so at an illegal party. Good for the youngsters, I say. Thank you, Brian. I suppose the concerning thing, isn't it, that if I suppose some people who look on at this particular news story and see and witness all these young people at this particular event might then take from that it's okay to go ahead and organise their own parties. And ignore the fact that this is a very carefully controlled, government-sanctioned event, and actually anything outside of that parameter remains illegal. They might think that sends a signal to crack on with life as normal. That's a worry, isn't it? 0800 731 2000 with your thoughts on that. You can email jim@bbc.co.uk. I'll get to your emails in a moment or two. Let's go back to the phones now, though. And Peter is on the line next. Hello, Peter. Good morning to you, sir.
Oh, good morning, Jim. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome, Peter. Thanks for calling. What would you like to say?
Yeah, two things about the rain. What I would say to Boris Johnson. I mean, you made a very good point when you just said, with the rain, we can crack on and all go back to normal.
Well, some people might think that, and it's a concern that this will send a signal out to those who don't delve anywhere deeper than the headline, which, there is a portion of society that don't look at that. They'll just look at the images of all these young people dancing around in this warehouse and think, oh, brilliant, we can crack on. But
true, very true, very true. And I'm very against it. It's pretty much horrifying to visualise 3,000 people in close proximity, and we don't really know how many of those have slipped through the net and gone to the concert or rave, whatever it is anyway. And it's a thing.
Well, when you say slip through the net, I think the security around those attending is very high. Even the lateral flow test they had prior to attending was supervised. They then received a text message to say they were negative, and they had to show that text and an ID to link that text to their personal identification before they were even allowed in. So they were very, very controlled as to who they were letting in.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's a good point, I suppose, but I think we're still playing a very dangerous game, like Russian roulette. It's just I mean, with the horrifying pictures and events what's going on in India, and this variant can come over easily to other countries and us and reach us as well. So, I just think it's way too soon. And
when would be the right time to do it? Because we could wait till perhaps more of the adult population were vaccinated. But bearing in mind, most of the people attending this event, I would imagine, were well under 30. None of them will have had the vaccine.
Okay, Jim, I get your point, but this thing, this vicious virus is not just going to go away. We managed just to stem the bleeding, and we've still got a lot to learn about the virus.
But is that not the point, though? If it is that the virus isn't going to go away, we're going to have to learn to live with it in whatever form that takes, and that means, I suppose.
What I'm trying to say is, Jim, is that then is what you said earlier. It's a guinea pig test.
It is an experiment. Yes.
It's an experiment, and what I would like to say to Boris Johnson, just plainly, if I had his own personal telephone number, I would say to him, just in simple words, you don't know what the hell you're doing. As simple as that. He seems to have a personal vendetta against his work colleague, not to mention Dominic Cummings and stuff like that, and all this silly riff-raff about, all this silly squash about his refurbishment and stuff like that. And it seems like, he has a personal vendetta against whoever fronts him, and times like these, we don't need it. Okay. It's too petty. Anyway, Jim, that's all I'd like to say.
All right, Peter. Good man. Thank you. And I understand your concerns. I do. And, there will be others that share them. Thank you for your call. Paul, actually, who's in Liverpool, says once again, this inept government is deliberately using Liverpool as their guinea pigs while they sit in sealed, sterile bunkers 200 plus miles away. This is called culling the surplus population, says Paul. Or taking out the trash. We are not amused. Thank you for your email. It's jim@bbc.co.uk. Text 81333, by the way. Start your text with the letters UK should you wish to share any thoughts on that this morning. If you're just joining me, we're also talking about the social media blackout by the world of sport, and particularly football. Who is responsible for cleaning up social media, or is it a much broader problem, do you think? Social media is merely an outlet for these kinds of thoughts, isn't it, from the people expressing them? So should we not be tackling the reason why these individuals are having those thoughts in the first place of hatred and bigotry, you could say? So is that not surely the problem, looking at the root causes rather than just dealing with the outlet for those feelings? I mean, for example, if somebody walked down the high street with a banner expressing some incredibly offensive thoughts, you wouldn't then go and sue W.H. Smith for selling them the pen and paper, would you? It doesn't make sense in that, if you follow that train of thought, as to why the social media companies themselves should be at fault for providing people with a platform to express their thoughts, particularly in a world where we supposedly embrace free speech. 0800 731 2000. Let's go to John next, who's in Purley. Hello, John. Good morning to you.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
Not too bad at all, sir. Thank you for asking. Go ahead, sir. What would you like to say?
Basically, a couple of things to reflect on. The business about the care home and the, residents being allowed.
Sure, yeah. I mean, this is being described as by one charity as a chink of light, really, for residents and their loved ones to be able to see each other and leave the home now for low-risk trips.
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
I think it's too much, too little, too late. I lost my mum through COVID a bit earlier in the year, and it was at least a year that she didn't have a break, and I could have, I could feel the strain on her, and she, the family would take her home around about the beginning of January, and not take her away rather. And usually used to be like abroad and stuff like that, and that all kind of added to the toll, and towards the end, she was very weak, and we kind of had to agree to her having the jabs and things, but I think that was the wrong thing, because she was not in a fit state at that time, medically. But anyway, that's beside the point. The other thing is the Prime Minister having his telephone number exposed to people. I mean, surely if you're a kind of high-profile person, you would not, you would kind of ignore any communication with, with people you don't even know. It strikes me as very, very bizarre that you would carry on with, that you would, continue with communications that, people.
So you think even though his number was clearly out there on the internet at the bottom of this press release for years and years, if it was an unknown number to him, he'd just ignore the call. He wouldn't take it.
Yeah. Okay. I think you're in a high-profile job.
I know, but hypothetically, if you were to have access to the number and give him a call, what would you like to say to him?
Basically, I would say, I know he's trying to do the best for what he thinks is right, but I would just say to him, it sounds a bit corny, but let's get serious, and let's run the country properly. Not no dilly-dallying, goalpost changing, constant goalpost changing and things. Let's just be consistent, and just be straight and honest with people.
Well, that's a really interesting thing to say, John, because particularly given the conversation we've been having all week about the refurbishment of his flat at Downing Street, and the cost of that and who paid for it, etc. Something which, of course, Downing Street said Boris Johnson did himself, as we all know. Just clarity, transparency, honesty, it's something that we all crave, isn't it, from our leadership? Lovely to talk to you, John. Thank you for your call this morning. So urging our Prime Minister to stick to that. Do keep your calls coming in this morning. It's 0800 731 2000. Lynn is on the line next in Wandsworth. Hello, Lynn. Good morning to you.
Oh, hello. Good morning. I've been a listener of your program for quite a while, but this is the first time I'm calling.
Well, thank you for calling, and welcome. What made you call this morning, then?
Well, I just switched on the radio, I think about 10-15 minutes ago, and I heard this lady talking about keeping a diary.
Oh, Margaret, yes.
Margaret, what a delightful character. I really enjoyed listening to this lady.
Me too.
And I'm also a diary writer.
Okay.
In fact, I keep a what's called a one-liner diary. It's a small book that you can buy in some the main bookshops. I'm trying not to mention the names.
It's okay.
Am I allowed to?
Yeah, please do.
So Raymond, Paper Chase, and also Waterstones. You can buy this A5 sized, A6 sized size books, and on each page you can enter 5 years. So it's 5-year entry. And you only have about 5 or 6 lines per year.
Really?
So you need to be quite succinct.
I would say.
What you want to put.
I would say.
So at the end of each day, I put down maybe 3 or 4 things that I have done or came into my mind. But then, if anything interesting or important has happened and that I wish to keep a record of it, I then go onto my journal, and I go from succinct bullet point diary to my journal, and in my journal, this is where I do my declutter of what's in my heart and in my head, and I find this process of keeping journal relaxing, meditative, and it's a wonderful process of writing things by hand, particularly during these digital age.
Yeah. And do you do that every day? Right, add to the journal, or is that just when you're feeling emotionally motivated to do so?
I would say about 5 days per week.
Okay.
So not every day, but fairly consistent. And there is an emotional engagement in the process of writing by hand. Some people are natural writers. They can write with pencil, pen, anything that's given to them. For me, it is with writing with particular pens, and these pens are fountain pens. So it sounds very old-fashioned.
No, not at all. I think that's actually a really important part of this process, isn't it? Because if you actually enjoy the feeling of the pen in your hand and the contact with the paper, that is part of the process, very much so. Rather than just a functional aspect of your life, as you've said, it's almost cathartic, isn't it?
It is. It is completely engaging emotionally and psychologically. And once I engage at that level with my fountain pen and particular ink that goes into the fountain pen and the touch of the feel of the paper, or I say the way the nib is gliding across this particular form of paper, because you can't use any paper when you're using wet ink. This is when there is one's interior really comes out. So in my journal, what I write is the things that go into my journal are very different to what I may be writing during the day. And particularly I enjoy writing either early in the morning or late in the evening. So the time of day is also a guiding factor. And when I travel, I carry a travel journal. And the little things like tickets, bus tickets or plane tickets, they go into my travel journal. So I am now going from journaling into scrapbooking. So there are different ways of keeping record of oneself in this. Yeah.
What would you say to somebody listening to your wonderful description there, who's still sceptical and thinking, gosh, all of this clutter, you're building up all of these books full of tickets and all of these random ramblings that you're scrawling down onto the page like this, all piling up, probably you've got boxes full of these things tucked away in cupboards. What's the point?
The point is, it makes me happy. I think, well, this is it. It lifts my spirit to be able to sit down quietly. It quietens my mind, my interior, and my soul. It is the process. What comes out on the paper is perhaps less significant than the feeling that I have when I'm choosing my pen carefully and choosing my ink carefully and do my scrapbooking or writing in great detail. And sometimes I write about my work. And some few days down the line, I have a solution to my work.
Oh, that's interesting.
Subconsciously, I find a way of getting out of the problem. So
it helps you solve problems as well. And do you mind, I mean, this is a personal question, but do you, so don't feel the need to answer it, but I'm asking, do you ever self-censor? Because they call it bearing your soul, don't they, in this way? You can be 100% honest about how you feel about any given situation in your private journal, in your diary like this. Would you ever resist writing something down? Or would you just be completely honest with the page?
I go for the complete honesty, because once whatever it is troubling me has come out of my heart and my interior, it's much easier to deal with the situation, whatever was or is troubling me. So I tend to unload everything, and from time to time I get rid of them. So I don't actually have boxes and boxes of diaries or journals.
Well, that's interesting as well. So actually, after what, a certain period, a number of years, you'll destroy them.
Yes, because they're not all important. But I keep all my scrapbooks and my journals. But what's in the diary, now and again they disappear. And because I'm not an important person, I don't think anyone would find my diary interesting. Anyway, I do it for me and for my mental health and for my it's really feeding the soul to unload and declutter.
Yeah, I love that. Lynn, what a pleasure to talk to you this morning, and thank you so much for calling and for the first time as well.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your program. You are very good with callers calling in.
Kind. Thank you.
You're a delightful person to listen to. Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed the show. Thank you very much, Lynn. We'll talk again, I hope. Isn't that fascinating? Do you know, I'm feeling a little frustrated that I didn't keep up my diary. In fact, I did take it back up again about 8-9 years ago. I started again, and one of the reasons I stopped, which I was reminded by just talking to Lynn there, was I mean, I've got terrible handwriting. I've always had terrible handwriting. It's so bad that, in fact, sometimes I'll look back at something I've actually physically sort of written on a page, and I can't read it. You know? So I would scroll into my diary.